Holy City Center Radio. It is episode 97, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Friday, March 17th, 2023. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Hope you all have a great weekend. Stay safe out there. Make sure you get in taxi, Uber, Lyft, whatever it is, a designated driver. Just be safe out there on the roads. St. Patrick's Day can get a little crazy, especially when the day falls on a weekend, which we have this time around. So be safe and be smart out there, folks. Hope you had a great week. Another one is in the books here in Charleston. We've got a few things to go over. First, since we're talking about St. Patrick's Day, just a quick reminder for those of you listening on Friday morning, there are some parades that you should know about. They're a little bit later in the day, so it won't affect too many people's commutes, but you may want to be aware of it. The Charleston St. Patrick's Day Parade is beginning at 10 a.m. on Ann Street. It'll then travel west to King Street and south to Broad Street before ending in front of the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist before turning north on Legree Street, where it will end. So keep that in mind. As if that wasn't enough, we have another parade downtown. The Hibernian Society St. Patrick's Day Parade will begin at 10:30 a.m. on Meeting Street in front of Hibernian Hall. They'll move south to Broad Street, east to East Bay Street, north to Queen Street, west to Meeting Street, and finally south back to Hibernian Hall. So just be aware of those. Again, the city of Charleston at 10 a.m. The second parade begins at 10:30 a.m. So it may be a little clogged downtown during those events. Oh, and also, although we're talking about parade start times, the area which they will travel, it'll actually close down earlier than that. So for the city's parade, they're actually going to close certain areas to traffic starting as early as 9 a.m. The parade lineup area that will be closing down is Ann Street from King Street to Meeting and Radcliffe Street from King to Rutledge. In addition, that same parade route, the cities, will have some other areas that'll close down a little later, starting at 10 a.m. They'll have some closures, and then the Hibernian Society's parade route will lead to some closures starting at 10:30 a.m. I'm not going to run down all of them. Just follow the link in the bio because there are several areas that you're not going to be able to travel down or be near really during those times. So be sure to check that out for more information. The city does say that all roadways are expected to be reopened by 11:30 a.m. All right, next up, Senator Lindsey Graham on Thursday introduced the Respect for the Second Amendment Act. Gotta love these titles they come up with for these bills. So Graham, who is the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, introduced this bill on Thursday. It's co-sponsored by a bunch of other Republicans. A lot of the ones you would suspect are involved in this. According to Lindsey Graham's department, here is what the Second Amendment Act, Respect for Second Amendment Act would accomplish. So if it goes through, these are the bullet points you need to know. They say it'll recognize the importance of Second Amendment rights, whatever that means. It'll codify a law into federal law that currently creates a backstop to any future change from the Supreme Court. So basically, they would make it so any changes to the Second Amendment, anything involving guns, the Supreme Court won't be able to do. It will also create public and private causes for action for any harmed individual so they can file suit against any law, rule, ordinance, etc. that infringes on Second Amendment rights. So when I first read that earlier today, I was like, oh, okay, it creates a way for any harmed individual to sue, thinking, oh, we're talking about guns. So someone who's hurt by a gun, there's gonna be some recourse depending on, why they, what kind of injury, should that person not have had a gun, or, is it going to hold gun manufacturers responsible? No, of course not. They don't care about individual harm by gun violence. They care if someone believes their Second Amendment rights have been harmed. That's what they actually care about. So if some city, state, whatever passes a law or maybe something to do with a business not allowing guns, if someone believes that law doesn't, is not in line with these new federal laws, they will have avenues to go so they can sue. As part of that, it would move any attorney fees and costs to the government if that private lawsuit prevails. So basically, whatever government passed the law, they're going to have to pay if it is determined, yep, your Second Amendment rights were infringed upon. Next up, It will enable the courts to strike down state and local gun control laws when they conflict with the federal law. So basically, kind of what you would think it would be. And no surprise that Lindsey Graham, one of this country's worst senators, is putting that out there. So while gun violence continues to rise, and certain states and cities, including South Carolina, are trying to make it easier for people to get guns, to make it easier for people to not be punished if, say, like their guns are stolen. They're doing everything in their power to side with the Second Amendment in any interpretation they can wiggle around it. I think a lot of people are fine with the Second Amendment on the base level, but it's been twisted into all these, oh well, Second Amendment means any weapon, so I can have an AR-15 for whatever reason I want. And there's people who believe that some weapons that are restricted shouldn't be, and it's always twisted and turned around to these ridiculous things. And again, the problem in this country isn't a lack of guns or people's rights to own guns being infringed upon. You rarely hear about situations like that where, oh well, this person who should have had a gun was denied it, their rights were denied, and it shouldn't have been, and if it wasn't for that, they'd still be alive today. And like, you don't hear that because that's not what's happening. It's the opposite. It's always, how did this person get a gun that shouldn't have had one, or what, or maybe it should, and sometimes that shouldn't have is legally they shouldn't have, like the Charleston shooter, how that went through. Or other situations where, okay, they weren't on a list, and legally in our current laws shouldn't have been, but you know common sense, now that we know about this person, man, they really should have been on some kind of list that should have prevented them from getting guns. That's what we deal with, not the opposite. We have plenty of ways that people are able to keep their guns and other weapons. We don't have a problem with the Second Amendment. We have a problem with the Second Amendment being stretched and some of the laws in place not being effectively implemented or run or enforced. That's the problem. But no, Lindsey Graham and company decides, no, don't worry about that. Don't worry about all the gun violence. Let's just make it easier for people to get guns. Let's make it so that they can sue if they feel like a city has made a law that they feel is unjust, and then we'll make the city pay for that lawsuit if they lose. That's what's important here. Priorities, as always. Remember during the election, or no, I'm sorry, not the election, the presidential election, but the midterms, when all the talk was about inflation and how we got to combat that and all these other talking points. And then once that ended, well, where's all the laws and proposals to fix inflation and to lower costs and all these things that hardworking Americans believed in? It was all nonsense, of course. They don't care. That was all the stuff that people were saying with no intentions of doing anything about it. Now that they're in office, whether it's on the local level or federal level, all it's talking about is guns, LGBTQ, trans, drag shows, CRT in schools, like all this nonsense, all these culture war things. These aren't things that are helping anyone. It makes people feel good because they own the libs, or take that, Joe Biden. We have too much of that in politics on both sides, admittedly, on both sides. These like cheap wins, basically. This is just ridiculous. Anyway, you get it. All right, finally, we'll go back here to the local level. Apparently, Mount Pleasant has just been turning it up to 11, too much. And now they're going to have to just turn it down just a little bit. So a debate over noise regulations that began in 2021 and was driven by residents, who were upset by what they said was too loud restaurants and bars, finally ended this week when the town adopted strict new rules, regarding noise regulations. So now if a resident complains about noise, the police are supposed to go to their property, and that's the resident's property we're talking about, with a decibel meter. And if a reasonable average of sustained noise coming from the other property, restaurant, bar, whatever it may be, If it does seem to be too loud, they could be issued a fine of $500 or even jail time if police deem it's necessary. Or I'm sure, depending on how many fines you've had, if it's multiple fines, more likely that jail time will occur. So, okay, what sound or how loud is unreasonable? What constitutes that? So what the city has landed on is that most cases the daytime limits are going to start around 8 a.m. So it should be pretty quiet at 8 a.m. From 8 a.m. forward, too loud is anything 60 decibels or above. That number drops slightly after 10 p.m. On Fridays and Saturdays to 55 decibels, and otherwise 9 p.m. on other days. So from 8 a.m. every day until either 9 p.m. on a weekday or 10 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays, 55 decibels is too loud. Does that mean anything to you? Probably not. It means absolutely nothing to me. But thankfully, the Post and Courier, who wrote up this piece, does have some, an example that kind of can help. Um, they said that the nighttime limit, that 55 decibels, is not quite as loud as a normal conversation or, say, like an air conditioner. That is according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So, a couple things on the base level, you're like, wait a minute. Something that is just a normal conversation or as loud as like a regular air conditioner, that could result in a $500 fine. Well, yes, but remember that the decibel is being measured on the person's property. So if someone complains, the police are going to come to their house, apartment, condo, whatever it is, and measure from there. They're not walking up to the restaurant. Obviously, that would be ridiculous because obviously it's going to be much louder than a normal conversation in all likelihood if you're right outside the restaurant or bar. So although that still doesn't really help me, I get that's a decent example, but I'm trying to think, as I've lived near businesses, if I could hear something on the same level of a normal conversation in my room, okay, yeah, I could see how that would be distracting, might make it hard to sleep or what have you. But it's just at the same time, like, has it really been that loud? So a lot of these complaints are coming from different neighborhoods, and we'll get into that in a moment. Before that, there's also a special rule for amplified sound. So, say a band or a DJ that is performing at a local bar or restaurant, maybe a wedding reception, for example. Uh, that amplified sound is going to be prohibited if it is plainly audible from inside of a residence or place of business after other than one producing the noise. So again, not from the venue, but if police show up, walk into your house, and it's amplified sound. So, speakers, DJ, band. If you are in someone's place of residence or another business for that matter, could call on another business. And if it's plainly audible, they can be fined even if it doesn't reach the decibel level that they've set out. So, that a lot of this, although the decibel side of things, at least there's something to measure so they can prove like, hey, here's the reading that we registered, that there's something that you can visibly point to. Again, I don't really know if that's ridiculous or not, if that's too high, too low, but at least there's something you can point to. But things that are worded like plainly audible. So what does that mean? If you just like hear any noise, so like you can tell there's music in the distance from a DJ on playing amplified music, that's enough, just hearing it, period? Or like, do you have to be able to make out the words from the song? You know what I mean? Like, it's just vague. All these silly rules I feel like are put into place to try to placate a certain group of people, usually a very vocal minority, and a lot of the times it's very vague. Because how do you decide if someone's being too loud or not? So they've come up with what seems to me to be arbitrary decibel levels, and on top of that, they've added this exception where it's even more confusing because there is no level to point to. It's going to come down to discretion, and that never goes well. And it also means, as the Post and Courier pointed out, that even a loud radio or television could run afoul of the new rules if it could be heard inside another person's home or business. So, also, I'm sure some of these businesses are going to work together. So, think of Shem Creek, for instance. If two businesses that are next to each other can hear the other business next door, they're technically breaking that rule, right? So, I'm sure they're going to work together you're not going to have one business on Shem Creek calling on another because that business is just going to in turn do the same thing. I'm sure they're going to try to work together, but ostensibly, if there was some kind of gripe between owners or staffs of places, they could easily just constantly be calling these noise complaints. So again, I'm not saying there isn't a problem over there. I don't live there. So I'm sure the people complaining have their reasons. But again, and I know they've taken a couple years to come up with these rules, but it's just very interesting to me to see how it's going to happen. There are some exceptions if you're wondering. These are for special permanent events. The higher daytime noise limit applies to things like gas-fired leaf blowers starting at 7 a.m. instead of 8 a.m. So yes, we've been talking about businesses and restaurants, but it's any noise, so any noise that breaks those decibel levels. So it could be your neighbor, like this is implying, like doing yard work, but they will allow that higher level a little bit earlier for things like that so people can start working. And there's another thing. Some neighbor is going to call on their neighbor for being a little too loud for something like that, like work. What if they're just doing regular work at a normal time of day, but their leaf blower, lawnmower, whatever it is, just happens to go above that decibel level? You're going to give a $500 fine to someone? Just really interesting how this is going to play out. For an example, they did a 90-day test period back in 2022 with that 55 decibel noise standard. And there were 28 complaints during that time when they were testing this out. So 28 complaints in 90 days, but no real, the Puss in Courier didn't provide any background on what did the police find out, or what did this town find out, when they showed up. Was it, oh no, this person's complaining, it really wasn't that loud, or yes, this business would have gotten a $500 fine. They didn't really give the details. So the amount of complaints doesn't really tell us much, because we don't know of those complaints which would have led to a fine or jail time or whatever else. So where are these complaints coming from? Old Village residents have been complaining about the noise from the Shem Creek bars and also the Post House restaurant. Carolina Park residents have complained about the nearby high school stadium, while residents of Hidden Cove, which is a subdivision off of Long Point Road, have been complaining about live music from nearby microbreweries. So these laws are in effect. We will see what it leads to. Like I said, I'm not even saying this legislation is wrong. I just find it interesting, and I wonder how it's going to play out, because I don't think a lot of people have any idea what decibel levels sound like. Most people, and again, what's going to happen if restaurants and bars right next to each other have some kind of feud going on? They could easily just call on each other for that amplified music thing. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. Hopefully everyone will play nicely, and it'll make sense, but I don't have a lot of confidence in that. I rarely do when it comes to the government making rules that make sense and not enforcing the rules in a disparate way when it comes to different groups. There's going to be some instances where certain businesses are targeted more than others, or certain businesses get fined while other ones don't. Too many questions, I think, could arise from this, but we'll see how it all plays out. So that'll be it. I hope you had a great week. As I said, stay safe this weekend. I can't wait to talk to you all again on Monday. Thanks to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System for producing each and every episode. Thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every episode as well. And thank you to all of you for listening. If you want to support, go to holycitycenter.com/shop to buy some merch, or go to patreon.com/holycitycenter. Please also rate, review, like, subscribe, all that good stuff when it comes to this podcast. All of that helps out immensely. So please, if you have a free moment now or this weekend, please do that. I'd appreciate it. Until Monday, good night and good luck.